transit, parks, etc. The first question will be from Ms. Rees. The second question will be from Mr. Chiu.
So I'll ask the question to Mr. Chiu. So David, you always talk about being the only candidate without a car, that you are a big user of public transportation. And I know from meeting many people at bus stops and riding many buses myself across the city, we have a lot of issues. And the way that people talk about getting out of them is through innovation and more revenue. And I want to ask you a revenue question. One thing I proposed as part of my campaign is a $100 vehicle mitigation fee as a near-term way to bring more revenue into Muni. And I'm curious, are you supportive of measures, that measure and others?
It sounds like a one-time one here. So I am supportive of measures like that. In fact, for the last couple of years, I have been championing bringing back the so-called vehicle license fee, which is a fee that had existed in California for 5 decades until Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger rolled it back in 2003, which blew a $6 billion hole in our state budget and blew a $50 to $70 million a year revenue source in our own budget here locally. So I absolutely think that if we're going to prevent Muni from seeing our services continually cut and seeing fares increase, if we want to figure out how to make sure that our pedestrian walkways are not the most dangerous intersections in the state, which is what we have today, if we want to make sure that our cyclists are safe, we have to invest in the MTA, we have to invest in Muni, and I think we need to think about these sorts of measures before we consider additional service cuts or additional fare increases. So yes, I would support that.
And the question is from Mr. Chiu. After that will be Ms. Alioto.
So I'm going to stay on the same topic with regards to transit and ask John Avalos a question that about a concern that he and I have shared, which is access of transit to southeast neighborhoods. I represent the northeast neighborhoods of the city, and I often ride the number 19. When I've attempted to ride the number 19 Polk Street all the way through to the southeast through these neighborhoods, I feel like I might as well get on a car and take a trip down to LA, because it takes that long sitting on these buses. And I want to ask John if you could talk about your plans to improve transit access to the southeast neighborhoods, because I know we share this goal.
Thank you for your question, and it's a big topic, not just in the Excelsior where I live, in the Cropper Amazon neighborhood that use the 14 Mission line, but it's a big issue, not just in the southeast sector, but in the Sunset as well. You have the N Judah line that does not go all the way down to the end of the line, and people often get dropped off at 19th Avenue, and they're forced to wait for the next bus line to come. It's a huge problem on the 14 line as well. We have a transit first city policy, but it's not a transit first city out in the outer parts of the city, and I want to have a citywide perspective from the vantage point of our neighborhoods that are not in the middle of the city. And so we have to look at how we equitably use our capital dollars to shore up our lines, our Muni lines and the Muni wires down the system. We have to make sure that our operation funding can be extended out to those areas as well. By not extending the dollars out to the more far-flung parts of San Francisco, where I live, you're forcing more people to get into cars, and the car becomes more the greater option. So I need to fight with the MTA every day to make sure that the planners are focused in my neighborhood. And as mayor, I'm going to make sure that the planners are going to be fighting for dollars from the MTC, from the federal government, and our local dollars to move and stretch them out to the outer parts of San Francisco, where so many of us live, and where we can have a just and equitable transit system that we should all have in San Francisco.
Ms. Alioto-Pier is next up, followed by Ms. Baum and then Mr. Herrera.
Thank you, Tony. My question is for Supervisor Avalos. John. Before I left the Board of Supervisors, I asked the budget analyst to do an audit on our child care facilities, on 3 of them, First 5, DCYF, and Public Health. And what they found was that for after-school programs, what we found was that we had $1 million on the table that had not been spent and a waiting list of 150 families. how do we work through our budget and how do we make sure that the resources that we have that are available to people get to people and that we are spending what has been allocated?
Great, thank you for the question. And actually, my family are the beneficiaries of our child care dollars. I have kids in public school who spend about 3 to 4 hours a day in after-school programs at San Francisco Community School. And so my family is using the services and we benefit directly from those services. We've also been recipients, users of child care facilities in San Francisco as well, family daycare providers and child care-based centers. What I'm doing, even now as a supervisor, is I've been meeting with child care providers, with the Human Services Agency, with the Department of Children, Youth and Family, and with the First Five Commission to look at how we can consolidate all of our child care functions into one office. I've been meeting with folks for about 3 months, and I'm going to initiate legislation to create a task force to move us forward with a study of knowledge and evaluation of how we're going to be able to make that merger successful and effective, to shore up every dollar we can that's going to go for providing slots for childcare, providing slots for after-school programs. This is one of the areas where we can truly consolidate our city functions, and one that I am committed to, and one that will have an immediate benefit for families as well as for people who provide childcare who need greater professional development. And I look forward to seeing those changes happen within a year.
Ms. Baum.
This is also a question for John Avalos. In your first year in office, you served as the budget chair, and you admirably spoke out about the bloat in the police and fire department budgets. However, when the fire department threatened you with a recall, you backed down. And now, 2 years later, where the city is broke and these departments are even more bloated, when you are mayor, will you stand up to the police and the fire departments?
Wow. There's a Johnny Cash song I really like, written by Tom Petty, called "I Won't Back Down." I sang it during that time because I didn't back down. What I did was, we saw that there was huge general fund cuts that had happened to Department of Children, Youth and Families, to the Human Services Agency, the Department of Public Health, to the Rec and Park Department, and we saw huge general fund increases to the fire department and the police department. Part of it was overtime spending as well, and a lot of it's in salaries. And what we did, we made a cut. It was a symbolic cut, but it was a cut showing that there was a real inequity about how we were doing our budgets. And from that, we were able to make sure that we could actually, without impacting public safety services, we were able to get $6 million in the fire department. A lot of that moved into Rec and Park, into healthcare programs, into education programs, and we were able to help reduce the police department budget and find some fat in the police department budget, more than anyone had ever found before, about $3 million. And that was very effective to make sure that we can have services that really took care of our most vulnerable, but also everyone. Everyone enjoys our parks. We were able to keep lifeguards together in jobs and rec directors in jobs as well. And it's something that I feel really shows how much that I'm willing to take very risky positions to make sure that we have a budget that works for all of us. And I learned from Gavin Newsom at that time as well. I didn't agree with Gavin Newsom's positions on the budget, but I saw how difficult a stand position he took on his positions, and that's something I think is very, something I would like to be able to have in my life as well, that ability to stand up to that kind of pressure.
Mr. Herrera, followed by Mr. Avalos.
My question is for David Chiu. David, we've heard Mayor Lee talk a lot about something he's proud of, getting a balanced budget submitted to the Board of Supervisors. But already we are seeing that revenues at the state level are not coming in to the degree that they should. So my question is, have you done any analysis yet as to what the projections are, whether there are going to be any mid-year cuts? And if so, what would be your priorities of what to protect out of the general fund to make sure that San Francisco's most vulnerable are protected in these tough budgetary times?
So it's actually up to the Mayor's Budget Office and our controller to look at the analyses for these mid-year potential shortfalls, but these are questions that we are asking And I do anticipate that things are probably going to get a little worse before they get better. Certainly with the state situation, certainly with the national economy, our revenues haven't had the rosiest picture in recent years. From my perspective, where I would cut first, I think there are many aspects of our bureaucracy that need significant work. So, for example, we ask, why aren't we creating more jobs as a city? We have 15 city departments that regulate the business community. 14 city departments provide workforce programs. John and Michela talked about the fact that we've got 3 agencies today that compete to set childcare policy. We have some of the most dangerous pedestrian intersections in the state. 12 city departments share the responsibility of governing safety on our streets. And I think before we cut basic city services, which would obviously be a top priority, public safety and public health, or services to our most vulnerable, I think we've got to eliminate the redundancies, streamline, have some accountability in city government that we just have not had in many, many years. And I think we need a mayor who is ready to do that, and I hope to have that opportunity.
This is a question for Bevan Dufty. Let's see. I had actually met David Chiu a few years back. When I first met him, we were working on changing from a payroll tax to a gross receipts tax. We actually had crafted legislation that never got enacted, and now we're talking about doing it again. Bevan, what would you do to create progressive taxation in San Francisco? What do you want to see achieved, and what kind of revenue would you like to be able to bring in that's new revenue to our city and county?
Thank you. Most of us have talked as candidates about the need to reform the payroll tax and its role as a job inhibitor in San Francisco. In Los Angeles, they brought in a consultant who did a stakeholder process for about 1.5 years and really looked at the difference between a bakery and a gas station and how businesses function and what the impacts are and how you tax that business. And then it was brought before the electorate, and so that's definitely something that I would like to see happen. What I'd also like to talk about in terms of budgeting, though, is being an outcome mayor. And you can talk about pushing boxes together, you can talk about consolidation, you can talk about zero-based budgeting, but for me, it's making an investment and what's the outcome for that investment. So I've talked a lot about our problem with chronic public inebriates and the fact that we have 225 individuals who are chronic alcoholics, and that we spend $13.5 million on those individuals. And that those folks are bouncing from shelters to emergency rooms, to sobering centers, to jails, and that that's not an efficient way to respond, and that by creating pre-treatment housing, Seattle, with just 75 units, was able to save $4 million in the first year. I can tell you about an experience I had with Luis Herrera, the city librarian, where I saw, when I was on the budget committee as a member, we were spending $250,000 on security at the Main. And what the issues were is that there were a number of people who were homeless, and there were a number of other patrons who found it uncomfortable when they saw someone doing laundry in the restroom. And I talked to Luis and said, look at this problem from the outside, which is it's so difficult to case manage people on the street. And if you hired 2 case managers to work in the library to help people sign up for SSI or to help figure out if they want to participate in supportive housing, you're having a different conversation. Look at the fact that we're losing $11 million in fare reduction, and rather than having a police response like BART did, we should be having MTAP workers, young adults coming from the community who have a community connection, the young people you see on the yellow jackets working after school to make sure that they're not fights. And I think that that de-escalates it and it provides avenues for people to come into employment. So I think one of the best things to do is to look at what are we trying to do and how effective are we being. Someone on average going through drug treatment 3.2 times, not so effective. We can do better.
Very good use of the blue card to extend your answer right in there, Mr. Dufty. Leave that card behind you because you know you only have 2 left. The final question for this round is in fact from Mr. Dufty. It's your turn to ask a question, sir. No, Mr. Dufty has a chance to ask a question.
Oh, I didn't ask a question. Okay. I'll ask my question of Dennis Herrera. Dennis, You've obviously had to manage your budget as a department head, as a city attorney, but one of the things I'm sure you observed with the Board of Supervisors and the mayor is that traditionally mayors cut in health and social services, recognizing that this will be a high priority for board members, but it's also very debilitating for organizations that spend months at a time fighting a budget process. It's very laborious and stressful for clients, and I wondered how you view this and what sort of commitments you'd make in this regard.
Thank you, Bevan. I think you're absolutely right, especially now in these tough, challenging economic times when, really what we're talking about in this election is the role that local government is going to play in people's lives each and every day, because we're going to see increasing amounts of cuts at the federal and state level, and they're going to shift more and more responsibilities off their balance sheet, and it is going to fall to those of us involved in local government and in local communities, oftentimes affiliated with CBOs, to demonstrate that we can make a difference in people's lives each and every day and meet their needs in very, very challenging economic times. So, for example, Department of Public Health's $1.4 billion budget, but we all know that a lot of the cuts that are coming are going to happen when it comes to our Department of Public Health. Those dollars are the ones that are going to disappear the earliest. We've already seen Ryan Whitecare, as you and I have talked about. I know you've been a leader on that. How does the city and county of San Francisco backfill to make sure that HIV patients are receiving the care that they need? And that is just a emblematic and a metaphor for what we are going to see for our most vulnerable throughout our Department of Public Health system. But I recognize also that there is a partnership that we have with nonprofits, and particularly in these very, very difficult economic times. That's why 2 years ago I partnered with the former director of the Department of Public Health, Sandra Hernandez, to ensure or look at how we can be a better customer with our nonprofits. We provide $600 million a year to our nonprofits, and they are vital parts of our delivery service to our most vulnerable. But that doesn't mean that we can't be a better customer, they can't be a better provider. So we came up with 6 or 7 recommendations that from better strategic planning, encouraging mergers, outsourcing backroom functions, better philanthropic giving plans, to make sure that we could identify savings that could accrue without impacting the core delivery of services to our most vulnerable. Because we have to recognize that oftentimes our CBOs are the last bastions of providing culturally competent care. Oftentimes in neighborhoods that are underserved by the rest of city government, oftentimes in monolingual communities. So it's about setting that priority. And we came up with a whole series of recommendations where we could accrue tens of millions of dollars of savings without impacting core delivery services. And that's the kind of creative leadership that we need coming from the executive branch to make sure that we are adapting to a future time when there are going to be less federal and state dollars for us to take advantage of, for us to make a commitment in terms of putting local dollars up, but also being more creative, working with our CBO partners to demonstrate that those of us working as a local community can be more proactive when it comes to providing services in a creative way to our most vulnerable. And that's leadership that has to come from the executive branch, so we don't have organizations that are sitting there fighting during the ad-back process to get what crumbs are left. We need to make a priority as a city that we are going to take care of our most vulnerable in these challenging economic times, and that has to come out of the executive branch.
A 3.5-minute answer might be a record for this campaign season.
I got one more left, right?
You have one left. Let the record show that only boys were asked questions in this round. So we have Ms. Rees, Ms. Alioto-Pier, and Ms. Baum, who can speak for 90 seconds on the subject of preventing customer services. We'll start with Ms. Rees.
So one of the things that we absolutely have to do, and Bevan alluded to it, and I agree with Dennis, that we focus on the people either with the loudest voice or the most money and influence to figure out where we put investment. We absolutely have to implement zero-based budgeting. What I mean by that is going department by department, making sure that we're investing in the critical services to meet the needs of the community, and really applying a discipline. Bevan, you mentioned, programs that are really proven to work, making sure that we're continuing to invest in those that are working, and then if we're supporting things that are no longer meeting their intended purpose, that we have the discipline to not continue to fund those. I have requested the budget from every single city department. I originally did it by a phone call, then by a letter, then by a sunshine request. I've received zero budgets from any city department. I keep getting referred back to the main controller's budget. By the way, as a citizen, we have a right to these budgets. And in the main controller's budget, there are items called miscellaneous revenue with $160 million in them. There's categories called other expenses with $54 million, other expenses with $22 million. We cannot see the clarity and detail. We need to make budgets open and easily for people in the community to read so that you can hold your leaders accountable and have the leaders spend your money. And that there's complete transparency, and you have a voice in terms of where we spend money in terms of what's most important.
Alioto-Pier, followed by Ms. Baum.
Transit's so great you don't need your car. Buses every 10 minutes from 6 a.m. to midnight, every half hour, from midnight to 6 a.m. A lot more jobs. Let's have bike lanes that are really safe with physical barriers between the traffic as they have in Amsterdam, where I lived for 5 years. Make Muni magnificent. Every down below the ground stop is a real art gallery with mosaics and murals. Every bus shelter is a work of art. How do we pay for this? Downtown Transit Assessment District, because Muni benefits downtown businesses disproportionately, they should pay disproportionately. We also can institute a carbon tax. We also can charge for curb cuts. When the curb is privatized and nobody else can park there, the landowner should pay. We also can have park in front of your driveway permits. And we also can have a vehicle registration fee as proposed by one of my colleagues. I think that's a great idea. We want to have transit so fabulous that you want to take it. You don't want to take your car.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Let me add on to something that Terry said about transit, which is absolutely 100% correct, that it should be what you want to take. One thing, though, that I do want to say is that in a city like ours, right now it's not accessible to people with disabilities. It is very difficult to ride a bus in San Francisco when you use a wheelchair. And it's complicated when you have a bunch of little kids that you're tagging along with you. So I hope that as part of this conversation grows during this mayor's race, that we make sure that we're incorporating people with disabilities and the elderly and our families in our transit community, because sometimes I don't think that they feel like they're a part of it. I worked for Vice President Gore for 3 years, way back in 1992. It makes me feel old. But one of the things that we did was the Reinventing Government Initiative. And what was interesting about it was that we went into every department at the federal level and we cut back and made efficiencies. And we used technology to help us get where we wanted to go. In San Francisco, when we talk about San Francisco's budget and what Joanna was saying about sunshine requests of wanting to see the budget and asking a million times where it was, the big question as a member of the Board of Supervisors was that it was hard for me to get that kind of information. When we talk about a zero-based budget, it is a great idea, at least the first year, to make sure that we're starting at ground zero. But in order for us to maintain that type of open transparency, we also need to make sure that we have a budget that we can see. A few years ago, I pulled together different members of our City Hall community in our tech world to sit down and talk about having a searchable database, a searchable budget. So once the budget was passed, it was online. As a member of the board or as anyone out there in the public, you could get online, you could type in a nonprofit or a department, and you could see where the money went, you could see how the money was spent, who spent it for what. And what was so interesting about it was that in this beautiful city of ours that's so technologically advanced, our technology wasn't up to spec. And so as we move forward, we need to make sure that our technology that brings all of our city departments together is upgraded, that we have a database that is searchable so that everyone can see how we spend our money, and to make sure that the audit that I spoke about earlier with the 3 child care agencies, if we had a searchable form, we wouldn't be losing $1 million for child care if we knew where all of our money was spent all the time.
And that brings us round 2. I'll just call your attention in the audience.